The moment I walked into my store manager's office and saw the old man from the checkout line sitting in the chair across from the district director's desk, I felt the floor shift under me. He was wearing a plain gray cardigan when I'd seen him 40 minutes ago. Now he had on a crisp button-down, and there was something about the way he sat, completely still, hands folded, like a man who had never once been in a hurry, that made me understand immediately that I had badly misjudged who he was. He looked at me the same way he had at the register, calm, almost kind. I had no idea what was about to happen. 3 weeks earlier, I was running checkout lane 4 on a Tuesday afternoon, which was the kind of shift nobody wanted. The store was half empty. The fluorescent light above my register had been flickering for 2 months, and facilities still hadn't fixed it, and my feet hurt because I'd been on since 7 in the morning covering for a coworker who called out sick. I'd been working at Meridian Grocery for about 2 years at that point. It was a regional chain, not a big box, not a boutique. Solid, steady, the kind of place where the same customers come in every week and you learn their names without meaning to. I liked that part of it. I liked knowing that the woman who always bought the store brand orange juice and nothing else preferred paper bags, and that the older gentleman who came in every Thursday for his newspaper and a rotisserie chicken wanted it double-bagged so it didn't leak. I was good at my job. I wasn't the fastest cashier, and I knew that, but I was careful and I was consistent, and customers never left my lane frustrated. That mattered to me more than speed. My store manager at the time was a man I'll call my manager. He'd been promoted about 8 months before I met him, transferred in from a location across the state, and from his first week it was clear he had a very specific idea of how things should run, and a very specific idea of which employees were worth his attention. I was not one of them. I was a cashier. In his framework, cashiers were replaceable and interchangeable, and any time I had a suggestion or a question, he had a way of looking at me like I'd said something slightly absurd. He wasn't cruel exactly. He was just indifferent, in a way that felt worse than cruelty sometimes, because at least cruelty acknowledges you exist. That Tuesday, around 2 in the afternoon, an older man came into my lane with a small basket. He was maybe 70. White-haired, wearing a cardigan that had been washed so many times it had gone soft. He had one of those faces that's hard to read, not unfriendly, not particularly warm. Just settled. He set his basket on the belt and I started scanning. Tomatoes. A small container of soup, 1 box of crackers, a bag of coffee, bread. It wasn't a big order. $26 and some change. He reached into his wallet and pulled out a card and slid it across the counter. I ran it. The machine paused for longer than usual, and then the little screen flashed. Deckhanland. He said. Just that. No embarrassment, no frustration, just a quiet acknowledgement. Happens sometimes, I said. Want to try it again? He tried it again. Same result. He looked in his wallet. He had some cash, but not enough. Maybe $12 in bills. He looked at his items on the counter and I could see him doing the math, deciding what to put back. The line behind him wasn't long. One woman with a full cart, an older couple who'd been chatting quietly. Nobody was visibly impatient, but I still saw it. That particular stillness a person gets when they're trying not to show that they're embarrassed. He was reaching for the soup first, going to put it back. I don't know exactly why I did what I did next. I'd like to say it was a considered decision, but it wasn't. It was just a reflex. Actually, hold on, I said. I pulled my own card from my apron pocket. I kept it there for exactly nothing in particular. It just ended up there, and I ran it before he could say anything. 26.42. Approved. I started bagging his groceries. He stood very still for a moment. You didn't have to do that, he said. It's fine, I said. I hope your afternoon gets better. He picked up his bags. He looked at me for a second. That same calm, measuring look, and then he nodded, just once, and walked out. The woman with the full cart said, "That was very sweet, honey." And I smiled at her and started scanning her items, and that was that. I didn't think about it much for the rest of my shift. $26 wasn't nothing, but it wasn't catastrophic. I figured maybe his bank had flagged the card for some reason and he'd get it sorted out. I wasn't expecting anything. I wasn't even really expecting to see him again. I went home that night, ate dinner, watched something on my phone, went to sleep. About a week after that, my manager called me into his office at the end of my shift. I want to be honest about what that felt like. It felt like being called to the principal's office when you're pretty sure you haven't done anything wrong, but you're also not completely certain. My manager had never once called me in for a positive reason. In 2 years, our one-on-one conversations had been limited to scheduling conflicts. A single performance review where he'd said I was meeting expectations, in a tone that made it clear that was not a compliment. And one incident where a customer had complained that I was too slow, and he'd relayed the complaint to me in front of 2 other employees. I sat down across from him. He didn't look up from his desk right away. He had a habit of making people wait while he finished whatever he was doing, and I had learned not to fill that silence. "I've been looking at your numbers," he said finally. I waited. "Your throughput is consistently below the lane average. You're running about 12% slower than the median." "Okay," I said. "It's not okay," he said. "It's a problem. Customers in your lane wait longer. That creates a perception issue for the whole store." I had heard some version of this before. I kept my voice even. "I've had very few customer complaints. My accuracy rate is..." "Speed matters," he said, cutting me off. Not rudely, just flatly, like I'd said something beside the point. "I've been keeping track. If this doesn't improve in the next 30 days, I'm going to have to make some staffing decisions." That was it. No suggestions for how to improve. No acknowledgement of anything I did well. Just a number and a deadline, and the implication that my job was at risk. I went home that night and sat on the edge of my bed and thought about it for a long time. I'd been told I was slow before. I knew I wasn't the fastest. But I also knew that my lane had some of the highest customer satisfaction scores on the front end. I knew I hadn't had a cash register discrepancy in over a year. I knew that when new employees were trained on the register, they were often paired with me because I was thorough and patient. None of that seemed to matter to him. I thought about going to HR. I even pulled up the company's internal reporting page on my phone. But I knew how it would look. A cashier complaining that her manager told her to work faster. It seemed like the kind of thing that gets you labeled difficult and doesn't actually change anything. So I didn't report it. I just went back to work the next day and tried to be faster. The following week was bad in ways I didn't fully notice until later, when I looked back at it. My manager cut my hours by 4. He told me it was a scheduling adjustment. He moved me to the lane closest to the exit, which gets the most wind in winter when the doors open and where the register light had now also started flickering. He assigned me a new task, restocking the reusable bags at the front of the store between customers, which sounds minor but in practice meant I was constantly leaving my lane and then rushing back, which, unsurprisingly, made my throughput numbers worse. One afternoon he came and stood near my lane for almost 10 minutes during a moderate rush. Just stood there. Not helping, not saying anything, just watching. I kept my face neutral. I kept scanning. I said have a good afternoon to every customer with the same voice I always used. But I felt it. That particular pressure of being observed by someone looking for something wrong. That night I called my mother and she told me to document everything, write it down with dates and times, and I said yes and then didn't do it as thoroughly as I should have. The thing about that kind of slow pressure is that it's very hard to explain to someone from the outside. Nothing he did was dramatic. There was no single incident I could point to. It was just a sustained, low-level erosion. A message, delivered over weeks, that I was not valued and probably not wanted. I'd been in that situation before. Once in a previous job, once with a professor in college who'd decided early on that I wasn't worth her time. I knew the shape of it. I knew it wasn't about my performance. But knowing that doesn't make it easier to carry. I started dreading going to work. Not in a way that made me call out sick or show up late. I don't do that. But in a quieter way. The alarm would go off, and there would be a second before I was fully awake where I felt fine. And then I'd remember, and the day would already feel heavier than it should. 2.5 weeks after I paid for the old man's groceries, I was called into the office again. This time, when I walked in, the district director was sitting at my manager's desk. I had seen the district director exactly once before, during a store walkthrough about 6 months earlier. She was a tall woman in her 50s, extremely organized, the kind of person who takes notes in a meeting and then emails you a summary before you've even left the building. She was not someone who showed up unannounced on a Tuesday afternoon. My manager was standing to the side, and he looked like a man who had recently received some information he did not want. The district director looked up at me. "Come in," she said. "Close the door." I sat down. "I want to ask you about something that happened about 3 weeks ago," she said. She glanced at a notepad in front of her. "Tuesday the 14th. A customer in your lane. Card declined." My heart did something complicated. I'd almost forgotten about it. "Yes," I said. "I remember. You paid for his groceries." "I did." She nodded slowly. "Why?" I thought about how to answer that. "He was going to put things back," I said finally. He seemed embarrassed. "It wasn't a lot of money." She wrote something down. "Did you know who he was?" "No," I said. "I've never seen him before that day." She put her pen down and looked at me for a moment. "The man whose groceries you paid for," she said, "is Aldrich Connor. He's the founder of this company. He started Meridian Grocery 31 years ago. He stepped back from day-to-day operations about 4 years ago, but he still holds a significant ownership stake, and he occasionally visits locations without identifying himself. He was here that day specifically to observe customer interactions." The room went very quiet. "His card declined," I said. It seemed like an absurd thing to say, but I couldn't think of anything else. "He does that deliberately sometimes," she said. "He wants to see how employees respond when there's an inconvenience. Most people find a polite way to ask the customer to pay with something else. Some people get impatient. He said in 30 years of doing this, you're the 4th person who has simply paid for it themselves without making a production of it." I didn't know what to say. He also said you didn't make him feel like a charity case, you just kept moving. I looked down at my hands in my lap. The district director opened a folder. "I've been reviewing your employee file this morning. Your customer satisfaction scores are consistently high. Your accuracy record is excellent. You have not had a single cash drawer discrepancy in over 14 months. She paused. "I've also been made aware that you were put on informal performance review last week for throughput." She said it matter-of-factly. I glanced at my manager. He was looking at a spot on the wall. "I want to understand the throughput issue," she said. "Walk me through your lane process." So I did. I told her about the restocking task that had been added, about moving to the exit lane, about the register light that flickered and sometimes caused delays when I had to verify the screen. I kept my voice even. I wasn't trying to get anyone in trouble. I was just answering her question honestly. She listened without interrupting. She wrote things down. When I finished, she said, "Thank you. That's helpful." She clicked her pen closed. "Effective next week, you're being offered a position as a front-end supervisor trainee at this location. It comes with a pay increase and a change in schedule. You don't have to take it. It's a significant shift in role, and I want you to think about whether it's what you want. But the offer is there." I opened my mouth and closed it. "Mr. Connor asked me to personally make sure the offer was extended," she said. "He was quite specific about that." I didn't go straight home after the meeting. I sat in my car in the parking lot for a while. I had one of those strange feelings you get when something you hoped for, in the back of your mind without quite admitting it, actually happens. Not the clean happiness you expect, but something more complicated. Relief mixed with something that felt almost like disbelief. I kept turning over the fact that he'd come back, that he'd made a call, that he'd remembered. $26. I've thought about that a lot since then. Not in a self-congratulatory way. I'm not telling this story to make myself sound generous because I don't think what I did was particularly impressive. A lot of people would have done the same thing. I think what I keep coming back to is how small the moment felt when it was happening. How completely unremarkable. I wasn't thinking about consequences or rewards or what kind of person I was. I was just looking at a tired old man reaching for a can of soup to put back on the belt. And something in me said, no, just fix it. I think that's actually the thing that matters most in those moments. Not the grand gesture, not the dramatic sacrifice, but the reflex. Who you are when there's no audience and no upside, and the situation is just a small Tuesday inconvenience that most people would reasonably let pass. I accepted the position. It's been about 7 months now. I won't pretend the transition has been seamless. Supervising a front end is a completely different skill set from working a register, and there have been days when I've made mistakes I had to go back and correct, and conversations with employees that I handled awkwardly and had to revisit. But I'm learning. My manager is no longer at this location. I don't know exactly what happened, and I didn't ask. The district director came back through about a month after that Tuesday meeting, and after her visit, he was transferred. That's all I know. Mr. Connor came in one more time after I started the new role. He came through my section of the floor during a busy Saturday morning. I recognized him immediately. The same settled posture, the same gray cardigan, though it might have been a different one. I nodded at him. He nodded back. That was it. No speech, no ceremony. He picked up a basket and did his shopping and left. I watched him go and thought about how strange it is, the way a single ordinary moment can ripple outward in ways you never see coming. Not because the universe is keeping score, or because goodness always gets rewarded. I don't actually believe either of those things, not reliably. But sometimes the right person sees the right thing at the right time, and the world makes a small correction. I try not to count on that, but I try to keep the reflex anyway. I've been turning this whole thing over in my mind for months now, trying to figure out what the actual lesson is. Not the tidy version you'd put on a motivational poster, the real one. Because the easy version of this story is, be kind, get rewarded. And I understand why that's appealing. It's clean. It closes neatly. But I don't think that's what actually happened, and I don't think that's what's worth taking away from it. What I keep coming back to is the gap between the moment and the outcome. 3 weeks separated them. 3 weeks during which I had completely forgotten about the $26. 3 weeks during which I was being quietly pushed out of a job I was good at by someone who had decided, without much evidence, that I wasn't worth keeping. If Mr. Connor had never come back, if he'd just been a regular customer with a bank error, none of the rest of it would have happened. I would have kept showing up, kept being methodical and steady and invisible, and eventually I probably would have been let go with some paperwork about throughput metrics. That's the version of events that happens to most people who do the right thing in small, unremarkable moments. Nothing. The world doesn't notice. The reflex doesn't pay off, so I can't stand here and tell you that doing good automatically comes back to you. I don't believe that, and I think it's actually a little dangerous to believe it, because it turns decency into a transaction. You help someone because you're hoping the math works out in your favor eventually. That's not character, that's strategy. What I think is actually true, and what this whole experience taught me, is that the people who tend to be in positions to recognize and reward integrity are often the ones who built something from nothing. Mr. Connor started that company 31 years ago. He still walked into his own stores in a worn cardigan to watch how employees treated strangers. That's not a coincidence. The things that make a person worth trusting. Consistency, steadiness, the willingness to do the right thing even when it costs something small. Those are also the things that make a person capable of building something lasting. He recognized those qualities in me because he understood them from the inside. And that's the piece I want to hold on to. Not be kind and good things happen, but something more specific. The people who are paying attention are usually the ones who earned the right to. They've made enough mistakes and corrected them. They've been in enough situations where someone could have helped and didn't. They know what it looks like when a person does the quiet, unremarkable right thing. Because they've done it themselves, and they remember how invisible it felt. I think about my manager, the one who tracked my scan speed and moved my lane and stood watching me during the rush. He was looking for failure. He had already decided what I was, and that's actually a kind of blindness, I think. When you're only looking for what confirms what you already believe, you miss everything else. He stood in that store for months and never once saw what Mr. Connor noticed in 40 minutes. I'm not angry at him. I genuinely mean that. But I think about that difference a lot. The quality of your attention determines the quality of what you find, If you walk through the world looking for people to be disappointing, they will oblige you. If you walk through it looking for the ones who reach into their apron pocket without making a speech, you'll find those too. I try to be the second kind of person. I'm not always successful, but I try.